Welcome to this webinar that will introduce you to compassion fatigue and building professional resilience. We know that working in schools can be difficult, and we know that there are ways to ease some of that difficulty. Stephanie Estrada and I are colleagues at Communities in Schools of Chicago, and we will be presenting this webinar today. Communities in Schools of Chicago is a nonprofit working to remove barriers that stand in the way of student success. We are connected to more than 200 Chicago public schools. You're welcome to find out if we're partners with your school. My name is Lo Patrick, and I'm the Director of Clinical and SEL Services. I have about 30 years of experience as a social worker in schools, as a school social worker, and as a supervisor of folks doing direct service in schools. Schools are incredibly important institutions, and supporting the adults who work in the school buildings day in and day out is one of my passions. I'll pass it to Stephanie so you can hear about her.
Great, awesome. Thank you for that, Lo. Hello, everyone. It is an absolute pleasure to be here and to deliver this webinar training. As Lo mentioned, my name is Stephanie Estrada, and I am the Learning and Training Coordinator at Communities in Schools of Chicago. As a Learning and Training Coordinator, I oversee our internal and external training courses, provide internal and external training, oversee the onboarding for our staff, procedures, and create opportunities here at Communities in Schools for professional development. I have worked with CIS for 7 years, 2 of those years which I have been in this role, and 5 years I worked at one of our 39 Chicago public schools where I provided intense student support services. Prior to the work that I was doing at Communities in Schools, I worked in a variety of community mental health settings, providing individual and family therapy, parenting classes, and resources to the community. I hold a master's degree in social work and have used my learnings to not only help communities in need, but also to help the individuals who do the same work and often find themselves impacted by the work that they are doing. It is therefore extremely important and gratifying for me to bring along and share the work on professional resilience with you all today. With all of that being said, let's go over our learning objectives today. We have some good learning to do, so let's see what's in store for us today. First and foremost, learners will develop an understanding of compassion fatigue, burnout, and the 6 pillars of resilience. We will also take a look at, and learners will apply the knowledge and skills related to professional resilience to lessen the symptoms of compassion fatigue. And finally, learners will create an action plan to promote professional resilience in their daily habits.
So we're going to start off with some definitions. One definition of resilience is the capacity of the brain to adapt successfully to challenges. So our professional resilience is the capacity of our brains to adapt successfully to challenges at work. Resilience means adapting well in the face of adversity and is associated with a mindset that recognizes our ability to grow through positive and negative life events. One thing to remember about resilience is it's really a process, not an outcome. You wouldn't brush and floss your teeth just on Mondays and then expect that that's enough for the rest of the week. In the same way, we can't just do a resilience skill on Friday afternoons. We really have to take steps every day to support our physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual health. We actually build our resilience by engaging in small actions, some of which we're going to cover in today's webinar. Why is this so important? Well, there are a number of reasons why this discussion is really important. First and foremost, we want to recognize and normalize that your work is hard and can be draining. As Laura Vandernoot-Lipsky points out in her book, Trauma Stewardship, she says, you can't walk through water without getting wet. It's really hard to hear about someone else's trauma or witness a trauma from someone else, like a student or a parent, and not experience and not feel that yourself. So we really do need to learn and practice skills that mitigate burnout and secondary trauma. Those skills are sort of the equivalent of drying yourself off after you've walked through water. Your well-being really matters because in your work, it influences your interactions with students, with your coworkers, and it also affects your ability to respond to challenging situations. The more professionally resilient someone is, the more they can notice and enjoy the positive aspects of their workday, and the better they can stay inoculated from the difficult aspects of their workday.
Great. Thank you for defining those terms for us, Lo. I am going to continue with some definitions. I feel confident that many of you have heard the term compassion fatigue before, but just in case some of us have not, I want to make sure that we kind of go through it, talk a little bit about what it entails, and kind of set an even playing field for us all while we're here together during this webinar today. So compassion fatigue is a term that describes the physical, emotional, and psychological impact of helping others, often through experiences of stress or trauma. Compassion fatigue is often mistaken for burnout, which is a cumulative sense of fatigue or dissatisfaction. While burnout is one part of this form of fatigue, the term compassion fatigue encompasses a more specific experience, which may be brought about by a stressful workplace environment, a workplace environment, a lack of resources, or excessive hours. Compassion fatigue can affect your ability to do your work or complete daily activities, at least temporarily. There are signs that can indicate that you or someone you know or work with might be developing compassion fatigue. And here are some of those signs and symptoms to be on the lookout for. We've got blaming others for their own suffering, complaining about your life or your work, engagement in poor self-care. We've got the experience of stress, muscle tension, escapism, just really having a hard time to concentrate, so struggling with concentrating, overeating, and perhaps even undereating, the experience of insomnia and maybe sleeping too much, bottling up your emotions. We've got some physical symptoms also, and that can include some headaches, migraines, the experience of those. Hypochondria is another symptom that can accompany compassion fatigue. And then we've also got the increased use of drugs, which can include the increased use of caffeine, alcohol, or any other substances. We've also got, some missing work, right? So maybe we're using more days off than we need to, or calling off more than we need to or should be doing. And then there's issues with making decisions, right? So difficulty deciding what to do and just making any decision really. And then finally, I want to call out that we can also experience some cynicism, right? Or bitterness, and sometimes even numbness, what we're experiencing. The good news is, I've stated all these bad things, right? But the good news is that compassion fatigue can be temporary and can be curable. Finding meaning in work and bringing conscious attention to resilience can make a difference in the experience of compassion fatigue and the way we show up for ourselves and for our stakeholders. Wow, so now I've talked about compassion fatigue, right? We can move into something that's a little bit deeper, maybe, right? And let's talk about trauma and stress. So stress, we all experience stress, right? It is our body's response to pressure. Many different situations or life events can cause stress, such as job loss, exams, deadlines, finances, or divorcing a spouse. However, stress is not always harmful. And while trauma is nearly always harmful. And as I mentioned, there are different types of stress, right? So I kind of went through and mentioned a bunch of negative things, right? Like divorce and losing a job and having all this work to do. We've got different types of stress. So we have positive stress. Positive stress, otherwise known as good stress, is the response that we feel when we get excited. Positive stress can also refer to the times you respond well to a challenge that you experience from a stressor. Good positive stress can result from buying a new home, right? Getting married, all those things. Passing an exam that you studied really hard for. That can entail some positive stress. We then have tolerable stress. Tolerable stress relates to the exposure to non-normative experiences that pose a threat and cause a great deal of adversity. For example, a family member's death, a serious illness or injury, a natural disaster, or an act of terrorism, and an experience with an act of terrorism. And then finally, we've got that toxic stress. I think the stress that we sometimes are a little bit more familiar with, or think we're more familiar with at the very least, right? Toxic stress is considered to be the most dangerous type of stress response. Toxic stress also relates to exposure to non-normative experiences that pose a threat and cause adversity, but it can have damaging effects on learning, behavior, and health across the lifespan. In addition, when a toxic stress response occurs continually or is triggered by multiple sources, it can have a cumulative toll on an individual's physical and mental health. Trauma is an emotional response to a stressful event, including accidents, rape, or natural disasters. This response typically includes shock and denial immediately after. Long-term emotions can include the experience of flashbacks, experiencing strained relationships, and also experiencing some physical symptoms. Physical symptoms similar to stress and compassion fatigue can include headaches, can also include nausea. These responses are very normal responses to trauma, but individuals can have trouble moving past them. And one thing that we know is that people have different responses to the same event, to the experience of stress and to trauma. Our work with professional resilience really aims to help expand our thinking on how we deal with and cope with daily stressors, stress, and trauma.
So this slide, this slide shows us the window of tolerance. This is what we're aiming for. We want to really work and live in this window of tolerance. We don't want to be in the hyperarousal state where we're irritated or angry or easily startled. And we also don't want to be in the hypoarousal state where we're numb or shut down or passive. We want to stay regulated and not become dysregulated. We want to be present and engaged. We want to be thinking clearly. The window of tolerance helps us notice and check in with ourselves about how we're feeling. You can ask yourself, am I in my window of tolerance? Am I feeling overwhelmed or am I feeling helpless? If you're noticing those types of feelings, it will be important to use some resilience skills to get yourself back to your calm and engaged state.
All right, so we've got some positive things going. I think we went through a whole bunch of different definitions that kind of bring about, some negativity, but we've got positivity coming, right? And that is that we can combat stress, trauma, compassion, fatigue. And Lo already kind of talked us through something that we can use, right? I am now going to go ahead and talk to you all about the 6 pillars of resilience. So Lo, thanks for doing that. I'm going to go ahead and talk to you all about some research on resilience and how we can start building our resilience. So the 6 pillars of resilience are an essential tool for helping us to understand and build professional resilience. The 6 pillars developed by Dr. Ariel Schwartz are based upon a wide review of research on the trauma experience and resilience, and shows us the behaviors and beliefs that are associated with the greatest adaptation to the experience of trauma. The 6 pillars of resilience are the pillars that are associated with our best experience and adaptation to trauma and include having a growth mindset, building emotional intelligence, engaging in community connections, engaging in self-expression, practicing embodiment, and awareness around our choices and sources where we hold control. So let's talk about those pillars a little bit more. When it comes to a growth mindset, it is important to cultivate an understanding that life, whether it is experienced positively or negatively, provides ongoing opportunities for new learning. People who remain resilient in the face of loss tend to have the belief that growth and wisdom can be gained from difficult or challenging experiences, right? So it is the idea that we can move forward, there is growth in what we've experienced, and we are focused on building into that, right? Or absorbing that. We then have the need to build emotional intelligence. It is important to recognize that you will experience different feelings, right? You might experience feelings of numbness, fear, exhaustion, anger, and sadness after a traumatic event. These feelings are normal and are part of your innate resilience. The key is to stay engaged with difficult feelings rather than avoiding them. It is common to want to avoid pain because maybe, you don't have the sufficient resources to handle the feelings, or because the process seems easier and less overwhelming. However, avoidance really requires more work than we might think it requires. Managing feelings takes a lot of time and can take a lot of energy. We then have community connections as one of our 6 pillars. It is essential to connect to people. Sometimes we don't want to connect to people. It's easier to isolate, right? It's easier, again, to avoid if you're isolated. We don't have to confront too many things if you're isolating. But it's essential to connect to people. And sometimes these are friends who bring a meal over, or the neighbor who offers a helping hand. It is important to continue to actively seek and build your social circle. Research suggests that resilient people stay involved in the community rather than isolate themselves. We need to build community in order to help heal the broken hearts. We reveal our brokenness in order to become whole again when we engage in community. We need places to be weak so that we can feel strong again. And that is why there is such an importance in building community. We also, as one of our 6 pillars, have the importance to self-express. If we cut off our expression of painful emotions, we also cut off our ability to feel open-hearted. You might choose to share your story with others or write in a journal that you just keep to yourself, right? You don't need to share these things with other people. It might just be all for you. You might explore creative ways to express your process through painting, poetry, movement, or music. Whatever really truly moves you, right? We don't want you, when you're thinking of this, to worry about whether your creativity looks or sounds good for anyone else. It really is your process and not the outcome that is important when you're thinking about the importance of self-expression. Next, we have embodiment. Embodiment practices invite mindful awareness of sensations of our breath, the movement for the purpose of healing. Unfortunately, our culture tends towards stillness in the face of trauma, but we need embodiment, right? Our bodies need to process stressful events through breath and movement. And when these are natural impulses, and when these natural impulses are ignored, the biological effects of stress persist long after events have even passed. Within somatic psychology, we uphold that the body provides tremendous feedback about the psychological impact of traumatic events, giving clear feedback about when the event no longer holds power over you and your body. We finally have choice and control. In the experience of trauma and stress, it often feels like we've lost all control. We've got no choices left to make. We are at our wits' end, and we've got nothing really left to hold power over. Traumatic events typically occur completely outside of your control. We do not get a say in this. It is common to feel that powerlessness. It is understandable if there are times when you feel like giving up. However, resilience comes with knowing that there are still things in your life that you do have control over. Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our responses lies our growth and our freedom. You can choose to get out of bed in the morning. You can choose what time to get out of the bed in the morning. You can choose to get dressed. You can choose what to wear. You can choose to brush your teeth or not. You can choose to call a friend or not, right? You can choose to engage in exercise if that's something that you want to do, or eat healthy food or not eat healthy food. Each of these small steps adds up collectively. They are an assertion of your willingness to continue to live. To stay engaged in your life really is an act of courage when you know that loss can and will happen. So you can put the 6 pillars of resilience into action by identifying activities that you can engage in during your daily or weekly routine that support you physically, emotionally, mentally, socially, and spiritually. While each one of these steps might seem small, collectively, the mindset and action steps associated with resilience can really help you to feel strong, more relaxed, capable, and more connected to others and more connected to the world. There is a wide range of resilient behaviors, some of which will resonate with you and some of which will not. As long as you practice these things in the way that you can, your resilience can and will grow.
Stephanie, thank you for talking through all those different components of resilience. It was really useful to think about. And I was thinking about which pillar of resilience am I strong in and which is one I need to shore up. So I appreciate learning more about that. We are going to talk now about building more professional resilience and take a deeper dive into what it is. Just a reminder that professional resilience is the brain's capacity to adapt successfully to challenges at work. We don't want to feel overwhelmed. It's true, I've said it before, I'll probably say it again. It's true that working in schools is not easy, and we might sometimes become distressed, especially if we're exposed to children's trauma from their own lives. I want to really emphasize feeling distressed doesn't mean we're broken or bad at our jobs. It does mean we need to use resilience skills during the workday to decrease those feelings of overwhelm, whether that's taking a few deep breaths before responding to a student, or whether it's taking 30 seconds to visualize a loved one right before you're going to pick up your students from lunch. Those are those are micro moments that are available and can make a positive difference in our days. It does take intentionality and work. It's kind of like a garden. We have to tend to it daily. We can't just scatter some seeds and walk away. This webinar is going to give some great tips, some more great tips, I should say, about how to do it. And please know that Stephanie and I will be your biggest cheerleaders for you to take these tips and do the work. The underlying factor that's really true about building professional resilience is that it takes reflection, intentionality, and action. It probably means making some changes in your routines or your behaviors at work. We know making lasting changes can be hard, and we encourage you to invest in yourself and your well-being. One way to build resilience is to use the SCARF model as a lens when you're going through your workday. The SCARF model was developed by Dr. David Rock, who works in the neuroscience of leadership, meaning like how our brains work and how that affects our behaviors. A major premise of this model is that our brains are always scanning for threats or for safety. We can really easily understand this in the physical environment. We look for cars before we cross the street, right? We're scanning for a threat. But we also do this in social environments. Think about when you walk into a party and you don't see anyone you know, and then you notice the friend who invited you, you feel a sense of relief, of safety. Well, think about this model in the context of our work. If we feel threatened in a social environment, which work is, our cortisol levels go up. Cortisol is a hormone that plays a role in how we regulate stress. So here's an example. Let's say you're not invited to a meeting by one of your colleagues. Your threat response may kick in because you wonder, why wasn't I invited? On the flip side, when we're rewarded socially, our dopamine levels go up. Dopamine is one of the feel-good hormones. It helps regulate emotions and learning. So here's another example. Let's say a colleague gives you a compliment. Your reward response may kick in. Let's look at the different domains which stand for SCARF. Status, which is our relative importance to others. Certainty, our ability to predict what's going to happen next. We like routines. Human beings really like routines. Autonomy, which is our sense of control over events. Relatedness, which is how safe we feel with others. And fairness, which is how fair we perceive the exchanges between people to be. This model helps us with our resilience by understanding that some of our experiences of stress may be coming from our brain noticing social threats. We can remind ourselves that's where the feeling of stress is coming from. It can be really helpful to name that to gain a greater understanding of it. And naming it can also make problem solving easier. When we name worries, it helps us get out of our feeling brain and into our problem solving brain. And this can help reduce feelings of burnout or compassion fatigue. We can also be mindful of how our behaviors may impact others. It can be really useful to think about SCARF before beginning a parent meeting or a grade level meeting. Just as we don't want other people to set off our threat responses, we don't want to do that to anyone else either.
I love that tool. Since we've been doing this workflow, have started to use it to really gain a lot of self-awareness. Super helpful. Thanks for walking us through that. I am going to go ahead and walk us through another tool that we can use. And this tool here is the zone of compassion fatigue. And what you see here is a green, yellow, and red kind of stoplight, right? So the zones of compassion fatigue is another tool, again, as I said, to help with building professional resilience. This is really a useful tool that can be used to identify what a green zone is, what a yellow zone is, or a red zone of distress is for you, right? So think of it just like the traffic lights, right? So green means go, you're good. Yellow means you might be teetering on something, right? So slow down, take a good look at what's going on, and then red, stop. Something's too distressing for you, right? So think of it as those traffic lights. The zones of compassion fatigue, again, is that way to help us develop that early warning system of distressing symptoms. Lo mentioned being intentional, right? So when you are building professional resilience, you need to be very intentional, right? This stuff is not going to just kind of come up for you. You need to practice intentionality, and the same you need to do with this tool. So it is really important to be intentional and to create self-awareness to prevent any symptoms of worsening or experiencing more distress. So the zones can look a little something like this, right? So maybe you're in the red zone. That can look like I'm experiencing disconnection from others and work. Maybe you're in the yellow zone and you're starting to notice that you're feeling irritable. Or maybe you're in that green zone, right? And you are maybe stopping exercising regularly and are not getting enough sleep. So that is what the zones can look like as an example. And again, they'll differ for situations, they'll differ from people to people, right? So the zones will change from person to person and can change over time and in your career. It is helpful to use this tool because it promotes, again, that intentionality that we are talking about, right? It promotes the need to check in on signs and symptoms throughout your career and experiences so that you are in tune with your experience and with what you are doing.
Thanks, Stephanie.
Absolutely.
We're going to talk now about an idea about balance. It comes from Frank Cross. He is a social worker and author. We often think about balancing work and life, right? Like that work-life balance. So work time and leisure time. And instead, we really should be thinking about balancing our brain chemistry. When we're stressed, we're flooded with cortisol and adrenaline. And to counterbalance those stress hormones, we need to bring in the feel-good hormones of serotonin and dopamine. We can do that by being intentional and taking action in the immediate moment to balance out the levels. So examples would be anything from like listening to your favorite song or looking at a picture of your pet or your child or a good friend. The idea is to find a quick and engaging activity to bring yourself back to balance and flood your brain with serotonin instead of with cortisol. So again, the idea around this is that balance is really about chemistry. It's not about how much time you're spending relaxing. I love this quote. Select your thoughts like you select your clothes. We have about 88,000 thoughts a day, so be choosy. This resilience skill is really around the narratives that we develop, which is another way of saying the thoughts that we constantly have. And the way that we think about work has an impact on the way we perceive and receive the work that we do. We want to create complete narratives for ourselves, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and to make meaning of those narratives. So if I think to myself as I drive to work, Ugh, it's going to be another terrible day. It's not really totally accurate. If I think to myself, ugh, today is going to have a lot of ups and downs. I know I've handled ups and downs before and I can do it today. I wonder which student is going to make me smile today. That second sentence is a more complete narrative of my day, and it acknowledges both the positive and negative aspects of my work. We build our resilience skills by telling ourselves meaningful and accurate stories. Another quick trick to use if you're trying to shift your narrative is to tell yourself that you get to do something instead of that you have to do something. So I can tell myself, I get to call a parent instead of I have to call that parent. And that can shift the way I feel about an activity or task. So these next two ideas come from Brian Miller's CSERT model. And these are concepts you can use to guard against compassion fatigue and to build resilience. So something that's true is we all ruminate about things and we all try to avoid tasks that we find unpleasant. Stephanie was talking about avoiding emotions earlier, and we definitely do that, and we do sometimes try to avoid unpleasant tasks. Some of us do that more than others, but all of us do this to cope with stress. Ruminating is when we keep thinking about something, usually a negative event or experience, and we keep turning it over and over. We keep replaying it in our heads. Sometimes we call that spinning. It's not very useful and it can bring up negative emotions. So instead of doing that, it can be really useful to try to reduce the ruminations. We're never going to totally get rid of them, but we want to try and reduce them. One way to do that is to call it out. So, for example, I could say to myself, Lo, you're ruminating right now. Notice that I used some distancing language. I used third person instead of saying I'm ruminating again. I wanted to do that to allow it to be something I'm doing instead of a part of who I am. Another way to reduce ruminations is to shift to a quick and engaging activity. And the very best thing to do is like shift to a quick, positive in-person connection. Maybe a 2-minute conversation with a work friend or a quick text exchange with your partner. I will say that just scrolling on your phone is going to be less effective than engaging in an activity with another person. So try not to just doom scroll. We want to do something to shift your mind away from that rumination. The other common stress response is avoidance. And while we all do it, the best way to reduce avoidance is to actually do the task we're avoiding. So here are some examples. If you want to feel less stressed about your cooking skills, you have to cook. You have to practice. If you want to feel less stressed about driving on the highway, you have to drive on the highway. Unfortunately, if you want to feel less stressed about talking to an upset parent or having a difficult conversation with your grade level partner or anything else that you've been avoiding, the most effective way to deal with that stress is to actually do the task. And then, what's your narrative about it? What are you telling yourself? Hopefully, you're telling yourself you survived it, you got through it, you did it. A question you can actually ask yourself is, what can I do to increase my willingness to do the thing? This can help you stop avoiding. Keep in mind that action absorbs anxiety, so the act of doing it will actually reduce your stress.
Right, Lo, thank you for that. I'm gonna have to be honest and say it is scary to have to act and face anxiety, right? I'll speak from my personal experience. Thank you, Lo, also for talking to us about changing the narrative. For me, that has been such a powerful tool, especially as I hop on I-90. I know that my commute can be an hour and a half sometimes. So changing the narrative on how I get to drive and get to drive to work has been super helpful and just feeling more positive. So let's talk about some more stress relief, right? And being intentional around that. Building professional resilience also requires stress release, which means that you are not only noticing your experience of stress, but you're also finding ways to release it, right? So we don't want to just tell you, hey, figure out when you're stressed and that's it, right? No, we want you to figure out when you're experiencing stress, noticing those times when you're experiencing stress, and then also knowing what you have in mind to release it, right? Or what you can do to release that stress. So what we want for you to do here is to notice sensations in your body. We want you to reflect and we want you to ask yourself, where are you, right? And you can go back to that, the compassion fatigue zones, right? You can look at that or ask yourselves, are you in flight, fight, etc. mode, right? Which mode are you in? And then when you notice and you are able to make that decision on which mode you're kind of in, which zone you're in, we want you to then engage in the practice of release. In other words, what we want you to do is to really activate your parasympathetic nervous system, that vagus nerve, by engaging in anything that brings you stress relief, right? And that can include getting a drink of water, moving your body, breathing deeply and slowly. Maybe it'll look like watching a silly video for 3 minutes to get that hit of dopamine. Maybe it's listening to your favorite song and even singing, humming, or dancing along to it. Or if you're at work, right? And when you're at work, talking to your favorite coworker or a friend at work for a minute. Maybe even grabbing lunch if you've got some more time. Babette Rothschild says, a major potential for preventing and healing compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma is tied to your ability to recognize the sensations that signal hyper arousal in you. So this here is what we're asking you to do to continue to build that resilience, both personally and in your professional lives.
What I love about what you were just talking about, Stephanie, is that there are a million different ways to do it. And I think when I think about like teachers and being in a classroom all day, how do we release stress when we're in front of other people, right? We've got all these students in front of us. I think we can definitely like ask others, like if you're feeling stressed, students might be feeling stressed too. So we can just say like, you know what, let's all stretch, right? Let's all reach up and stretch our bodies, or let's all like watch this silly video. There's lots of ways to engage other people in it, and you don't have to tell the students like, hey, I need to release some stress. We're all stressed. But we can do those activities and it will release everyone's stress, even if they don't realize it. So to create this presentation, Stephanie and I compiled information from a number of models and resources about professional resilience, compassion fatigue, and burnout. The bullet points that you'll see are commonalities that we found amongst the models, and I'll point out a few of them, including that all the models really emphasize the importance of being intentional, which is why Stephanie and I have been emphasizing it also. That to increase your resilience, you have to take some action. You have to intentionally use a coping skill to decrease those stress levels. They just don't go down on their own. Another important bullet point here is that the work of caring for others, whether that's as a nurse, as a teacher, as a social worker, that work involves both joy and pain. And we honestly, we do a disservice to the work if we only acknowledge one side. I'll also highlight that what you tell yourself is really crucial to decreasing compassion fatigue or overwhelm. And the last bullet point, I think, is probably one of the most important ones, which is that there is hope. It's not, if you're feeling really overwhelmed or you're feeling compassion fatigue, there are ways to reduce that for yourself, which is what we've been spending our time this hour talking about. We know how important it is to walk away with something tangible. So Stephanie and I created a action plan for you. And I'm going to give you the instructions for it. And then really what we want you to do is press pause on the webinar, create your action plan, and then push play again. So at this time, we really want to encourage you to take a few minutes to think through this action plan for yourself. We want you to jot down one thing you'll do tomorrow at work to support yourself when you're feeling stressed. Then we want you to jot down something you'll do next week and next month, really to keep building those resilience skills, right? Like I was saying before, we have to tend to it. So think about what you're going to do tomorrow, next week, and next month. And then think about how you'll know that your work has paid off. What will be different for you? Maybe you'll notice that you're staying in your window of tolerance more often. Maybe you'll notice you're ruminating less often. or that you're using your pillar of self-expression more regularly. So what will be different for you? Please pause, create your action plan, and then push play again. These are the resources that we used to really create this presentation. So you can see here, we've got the 6 pillars of resilience from Dr. Ariel Schwartz. We have compassion fatigue training from J. Eric Gentry, the book Trauma Stewardship by Laura Vandernoot Lipsky, CSERT, which stands for Components for Enhancing Clinician Experience and Reducing Trauma. That's from Brian Miller. There's a compassion fatigue workbook. There are several workbooks. Stephanie quoted Babette Rothschild, and we have certainly used concepts from DBT, ACT, and MBSR, and finally the SCARF model from Dr. David Rock. So if you're interested in learning more about compassion fatigue or professional resilience, this is a great starting point for you.
Absolutely. Thank you for going through those, Lo. I do, just as Lo mentioned, encourage you all to take a look at those resources if you'd like to learn more. They are absolutely wonderful resources that really help to inform everything that we have presented to you here today. And to that end, we have reached the end of the webinar. We want to thank you for taking the time to view this webinar and taking the information that was provided. It was an absolute pleasure of ours to deliver this today. We ask that when you are finished viewing the webinar and completing the action plan, yes, I said completing that action plan, please complete the survey and leave us feedback so that we can continue to improve and provide quality work. I also invite you to practice and put into practice any of the tools we talked about today and encourage you to take great care of yourselves. Thank you once again and happy professional resilience building. Thank you.